The official story of Louis IX, King of France, is an inspiring tale of piety, justice, and saintliness, a monarch so devout he was canonized less than 3 decades after his death. But the historical record, when examined without the rose-tinted glasses of hagiography, reveals a far more complex, even unsettling figure, one whose zealotry cast long, dark shadows over his reign. Shadows that few chroniclers or historians dare to explore in their full, uncomfortable depth. Born in 1214, Louis IX ascended to the French throne at just 12 years old, under the regency of his formidable mother, Blanche of Castile. This was an era steeped in faith, where the lines between church and state were not merely blurred, but often non-existent. The 13th century was a time of immense religious fervor, marked by crusades, the burgeoning power of the papacy, and the brutal suppression of heresy. Louis inherited a kingdom still recovering from the Albigensian Crusade, a decades-long conflict that had devastated southern France and left a legacy of religious intolerance. His childhood was shaped by a profound devotion instilled by Blanche, a woman of deep piety herself, who reportedly told him she would rather see him dead than commit a mortal sin. This upbringing forged a king whose entire worldview was filtered through an intensely religious lens, one that would dictate not just his personal conduct, but the very policies of his kingdom, with consequences often overlooked or glossed over in the narrative of St. Louis. The image we often receive is that of the king administering justice under an oak tree, a benevolent patriarch. But beneath that celebrated image lies a fervent ideological warrior whose pursuit of divine favor led to actions that, by modern standards, appear deeply authoritarian and, at times, cruel. One of the most profound and least discussed aspects of Louis IX's reign is his unrelenting campaign against those he deemed religious outsiders, particularly the Jewish communities of France. While he is often praised for his internal peace and administrative reforms, his treatment of Jews stands in stark contrast to his reputation for justice. Louis viewed the presence of Jews and their refusal to convert as an affront to Christian truth and an obstacle to the salvation of his kingdom. His policies were not merely discriminatory, they were actively destructive. In 1242, under his direct influence, the infamous Disputation of Paris took place, a theological debate orchestrated to discredit the Talmud, the central text of Rabbinic Judaism. Unsurprisingly, the debate was rigged, concluding with a condemnation of the Talmud as blasphemous. 2 years later, in 1244, following this condemnation, Louis ordered the burning of thousands of copies of the Talmud in the public squares of Paris. Imagine the systematic destruction of a people's foundational religious and cultural texts, an act of censorship and cultural annihilation on a scale rarely seen, even in a time of widespread religious intolerance. This wasn't a spontaneous act of a mob, it was a state-sponsored campaign aimed at eradicating Jewish intellectual and spiritual life. Jewish individuals were also forced to wear a ruel, a distinctive yellow badge on their clothing, marking them out and isolating them from Christian society. This was not a minor inconvenience. It was a tool of public humiliation and segregation, paving the way for further persecution. Louis also implemented laws that restricted Jewish economic activities, making their lives precarious and pushing them towards conversion. His motivation was rooted in a genuine, albeit deeply misguided, belief that he was saving Jewish souls by forcing them towards Christianity, or at the very least, protecting Christian souls from what he perceived as Jewish influence. Yet the outcome was widespread suffering, economic ruin for many Jewish families, and a chilling precedent for future anti-Semitic policies across Europe. These acts of religiously motivated oppression are often quietly omitted from the glowing accounts of his reign, deemed incompatible with the image of a benevolent saint, but they were central to his vision of a truly Christian kingdom. Beyond his policies concerning Jews, Louis IX was also a fierce enforcer of Catholic orthodoxy within his own Christian realm, albeit one already ravaged by the Albigensian Crusade. While the major fighting had ceased before his direct rule, the spirit of the crusade and the tools it forged remained. Louis actively supported the nascent papal inquisition in France, allowing it to take root and suppress any remaining pockets of what was considered heresy, especially in the Languedoc region. The Inquisition, in its initial form, was a brutal instrument of theological control, operating with procedures that often denied the accused basic rights. Suspects were interrogated without legal representation, often under duress, and faced severe penalties, including imprisonment, confiscation of property, and even execution. Louis saw this as his sacred duty to cleanse his kingdom of any perceived spiritual corruption. He believed that even a minor divergence from Catholic doctrine posed a threat not only to the individual soul, but to the entire fabric of society, potentially incurring divine wrath upon France itself. He personally involved himself in matters of blasphemy, a sin he found particularly abhorrent. Legend, supported by contemporary accounts, states that he would personally brand the lips of those found guilty of blasphemy with a hot iron, or even have their tongues pierced. While the exact frequency of these extreme punishments is debated, the mere possibility and the historical records that suggest it paints a vivid picture of a monarch whose pursuit of spiritual purity was absolute, often overshadowing any concept of mercy or proportionate justice. His personal piety was so intense that it blurred the lines between royal justice and religious penance, transforming the king into an almost priestly figure, eager to enforce God's law as he understood it, with a heavy hand. Perhaps the most defining, and certainly the most catastrophic aspect of Louis IX's reign, yet one still shrouded in an almost romanticized glow, was his unwavering commitment to the Crusades. He led two major crusades, the Seventh and Eighth, both disastrous in their immediate results for France, though they burnished his image as a warrior for Christ. His decision to embark on the Seventh Crusade in 1248, after falling gravely ill and vowing to take the cross if he recovered, was a profound personal commitment driven by deep spiritual conviction. But it was also a strategic blunder of epic proportions. He sailed with a massive army to Egypt, believing that conquering this powerful Muslim state would cripple the Sultanate and open the way to Jerusalem. The campaign, however, was plagued by disease, tactical errors, and fierce Mamluk resistance. The French army suffered catastrophic losses, and Louis himself, along with many of his nobles, was captured in 1250 during the Battle of Ferriscourt. Imagine the shock, the humiliation, for the most powerful Christian monarch in Europe held captive by his enemies. He was eventually ransomed for an enormous sum, 400,000 livres tournois, and the surrender of the city of Damietta. This ransom represented a staggering portion of the annual royal revenue, bleeding France dry of treasure and men. Yet, even after this humiliating defeat and immense personal suffering, Louis remained in the Holy Land for 4 more years, attempting to rebuild French influence and fortify Crusader strongholds, pouring more resources into a losing cause. This wasn't about strategic advantage for France, it was about his personal pilgrimage, his unwavering belief in a divine mission, even in the face of overwhelming evidence of its futility. His second major expedition, the Eighth Crusade in 1270, was even more ill-fated. Instead of targeting Egypt or the Levant, Louis inexplicably diverted his forces to Tunis, in modern-day Tunisia. The reasons for this diversion are still debated by historians, ranging from an attempt to convert the Hafsid emir to Christianity to a more pragmatic, but still flawed, preemptive strike against a perceived threat. Regardless of the motivation, the result was swift and devastating. The French army was quickly decimated not by battle, but by rampant disease, particularly dysentery, in the scorching North African summer. Louis himself contracted the illness and died in Tunis on August 25, 1270. His death effectively ended the crusade, leaving behind a grieving kingdom and a massively depleted treasury. The Crusades, though central to his identity as a pious king, brought France little tangible gain and cost countless lives, including that of the king himself. They were not strategic military campaigns in the modern sense. They were acts of spiritual devotion, an enormous public penance undertaken by a king who genuinely believed he was doing God's will, regardless of the earthly cost. This personal conviction, while admirable in its purity, proved disastrous for his kingdom and his family, leaving France weakened and in mourning, a heavy price for a saint's perceived divine mission. Then there's the celebrated justice of Louis IX, often depicted as sitting under an oak tree at Vincennes, listening to the grievances of his subjects and dispensing wisdom. This image is powerful, and indeed, Louis made significant strides in reforming the legal system, attempting to curb the abuses of feudal lords and establish a more centralized royal justice. He famously abolished the judicial duel, replacing it with evidence-based trials and sworn testimony, a truly progressive step for his time. He also established royal courts of appeal, providing recourse against arbitrary local judgments. These reforms were instrumental in strengthening the royal authority and laying the groundwork for a more unified legal system in France. However, the secrets here lie in the underlying philosophy of this justice. Louis's concept of justice was inseparable from his religious convictions. For him, a just kingdom was a morally upright kingdom, one that conformed to God's law. This meant that while he was keen to stamp out crime and feudal anarchy, he was equally, if not more, concerned with moral transgressions. His legal reforms often focused on the suppression of vices he deemed offensive to God: gambling, prostitution, usury, and, as mentioned, blasphemy. The pursuit of justice could therefore extend to intrusive moral policing, imposing a stringent ascetic ideal on a diverse population. The very same legal tools used to protect the weak from powerful lords could also be turned to enforce religious uniformity and personal piety. His justice, while revolutionary in some aspects, was also profoundly intertwined with his zealotry, making it a tool not just for civil order, but for spiritual coercion, reflecting a theocratic vision that would be deeply unsettling today. The oak tree at Vincennes symbolized direct royal access, but the justice meted out was fundamentally an extension of his own deeply held and often unforgiving spiritual beliefs. Finally, we must consider the very making of St. Louis, his canonization, and the cult of personality that grew around him. While his genuine piety was undeniable, his swift canonization in 1297, less than 30 years after his death, was not merely a recognition of his personal sanctity. It was also a powerful political act. Philip IV, Louis's grandson, the Fair, orchestrated the canonization, understanding the immense prestige and authority a saintly ancestor would confer upon the Capetian dynasty. A saint king legitimized the monarchy in a way no secular achievement could. Louis's image was carefully curated, with chroniclers like Jean de Joinville, his loyal companion on the Seventh Crusade, painting a picture of an almost impossibly perfect Christian monarch. Joinville's Life of St. Louis is a masterpiece of medieval biography, but it is also a work of hagiography, designed to elevate Louis to sainthood. It emphasizes his humility, his charity, his devotion, and his just rule, while largely downplaying or reframing the less palatable aspects of his reign, such as the disastrous Crusades, the persecution of Jews, or the harsh enforcement of moral codes. This crafted narrative, amplified by the Church, became the official history, overshadowing the complex realities of his rule. The secrets of Louis IX are not scandalous affairs in the modern sense. They are the inconvenient truths that challenge the carefully constructed image of unblemished saintliness. They are the details that reveal a monarch whose fervent faith, while inspiring in its devotion, also led him to pursue policies of intolerance, to make strategic errors of immense cost, and to impose a rigid moral and religious uniformity on his kingdom. So, when we speak of Louis IX, we must move beyond the simple narrative of Saint Louis. we must acknowledge the king who, driven by an almost unbearable weight of spiritual responsibility, was both a reformer and a persecutor, a pious pilgrim and a military leader whose crusades brought ruin, and a dispenser of justice whose judgments were steeped in an uncompromising theological worldview. His deep secrets are not hidden vices, but the uncomfortable historical realities of a man whose saintly zealotry shaped his reign in ways that were both celebrated and, for many, profoundly devastating. He was a product of his time, yes, but also an active shaper of it, revealing that even the most revered figures can contain profound contradictions, whose full stories are rarely told.